The prairie morning carried a strange silence, one that settled heavier than the dawn mist along the ridges of the frontier. Samuel Carter, a weary ranch hand who had been wandering without a herd or home, found himself staring across a vast plain where 70 mounted Apache warriors lined the ridge. Their horses stood still, tails swishing only slightly, and the riders sat like statues carved from stone. Each of them held a single white feather in his hand, upright and unmoving, as though presenting it to the wind itself. Samuel's throat turned dry at the sight. He had crossed hostile lands before, but never had he witnessed this ritual-like stillness. It was not war cries, not arrows, not the thunder of hooves. It was worse, for silence held the weight of judgment. The day before, Samuel had not thought himself a man worthy of so much attention. He had been traveling alone with his only horse, a strong bay gelding named Rust, when he heard the faint cry of a woman echoing against the canyon walls. He might have ignored it. Most men would have. But the sound carried desperation, not of battle, but of pain, and curiosity, mixed with conscience, pushed him to follow it. Beneath a crooked mesquite tree, he found her, a tall Apache woman, blood seeping from a ragged wound on her thigh skin, flushed with fever, her breath shallow. She lifted her eyes to him only once, and in that glance he saw no plea, only dignity resigned to whatever end awaited. Samuel had hesitated. Every tale he knew warned against aiding those considered enemies. Yet the memory of his younger sister, who had died in his arms years ago because no stranger stopped to help, struck him harder than any fear. Without another thought, he dismounted, lifted the woman carefully, and set her upon Rust's saddle. She murmured a name, Ayana, before slipping into unconsciousness. For 6 hours he walked beside his horse through treacherous ravines, guiding Ayana toward the landmarks he recognized as Apache territory. The red stones that marked their boundary stood like warning beacons. There he stopped, helping her slide from the saddle. She staggered forward, distant dwellings visible through the heat haze. Samuel had every right to reclaim his horse, to whistle Rust back to him, and ride toward safety. Instead, he slapped the gelding's flank, sending the animal after her. Rust followed loyally, leaving Samuel standing empty-handed beneath the burning sun 20 miles from the nearest settlement. Now, less than a day later, Samuel stood upon a barren rise, while 70 warriors watched him with feathers of pale white. His legs ached from walking all night, his canteen was nearly dry, and still they made no move to advance or retreat. The silence pressed upon him until it felt like a physical weight upon his chest. He remembered tales of Apache cruelty, ambushes, and raids, but nothing in those tales mentioned feathers. He braced himself for arrows, yet none came. One rider, older than the rest, with gray streaks in his hair, nudged his horse forward. He descended the ridge, slowly carrying his feather with deliberate care. The others remained frozen, their eyes never leaving Samuel. As the rider approached, Samuel noticed ornaments upon his belt, small bones, carved beads, and a scalp that made his stomach tighten. But the man's eyes did not burn with anger. Instead, they held something far stranger, a look of expectation. The warrior halted 10 paces away, lifted his hand, and spoke a single word in Apache. Samuel did not understand. The warrior repeated it, pressing his palm against his chest, then gestured toward the land where Ayana had disappeared yesterday. The tone was not hostile. It was reverent, as though naming a sacred truth. Samuel raised both hands slowly, the universal sign of peace. "I don't want trouble," he said, voice hoarse from thirst. "I helped because she was hurt. That's all." The warrior tilted his head, studying Samuel as if weighing the truth in his words. Then he reached into a pouch and withdrew an object that made Samuel's heart pound. It was Rust's bridle, the very one Samuel had crafted with silver pieces inherited from his father. But now it bore painted symbols, unfamiliar to him, fresh and deliberate. The warrior lifted it high, speaking another phrase before pointing directly at Samuel. The meaning was clear. Samuel's act of giving his horse had not been forgotten. It had been transformed into something far larger, something bound by laws he did not know. He realized then that the white feathers, the silence, the presence of so many riders, all signaled a ritual beyond his grasp. He had entered a contract without understanding its terms. Behind him, the sun rose higher, stretching long shadows across the dry earth. Samuel's mind turned to the choice he had made in that canyon, a simple act of kindness, yes, but also a sacrifice. He had thought it would end there, with Ayana safe and himself left to struggle on foot. Now faced with 70 warriors and an older man whose eyes carried the authority of judgment, Samuel understood that the story had only begun. The elder raised his voice, a sound deep and commanding. From the ridge behind, the other warriors responded, not with movement, but with a low hum that rolled like distant thunder. It was not a war song. It carried no menace. Instead, it felt ceremonial, a rhythm of witness. The warrior stepped closer, extending the bridle towards Samuel with both hands as though presenting an offering or a burden. Samuel's palms trembled as he reached forward. The leather felt warm, almost alive with meaning. He had not only given away his horse, he had unknowingly bound himself to laws older than the country itself. He swallowed hard, realizing the day would not end with him walking away free. Whatever judgment these warriors carried in their feathers and silence, it was now his fate to face. The older rider raised his arm and the hum ceased as if someone had pressed a palm over the mouth of a drum. From a narrow cut in the rock behind the line of mounted warriors, a procession began to emerge. Women first, then children, then elders who walked with staffs, burnished smooth by years of use. They moved without hurry, yet with the steady rhythm of people who knew exactly where each foot should fall. At their center walked a man whose headdress was taller and more intricate than any Samuel had seen carved on church doors in distant towns. Beside him, limping but upright, came the woman he had helped. Her hair was braided and tied with a strip of red cloth. Her eyes were bright though tired, and when she saw Samuel, she pressed her hand to her heart. The elder in the high feathers stopped at a respectful distance and spoke a few quiet words. The gray-streaked rider answered, then turned his horse slightly so that he faced not Samuel but the elder, as if even the one who had descended dared not place himself between guest and judge. A girl of perhaps 12 stepped forward, took the elder's staff for a moment, and the elder cleared his throat. His voice flowed in a language that had the taste of river stones and wind and cedar needles. The woman Samuel had carried, Ayanna, translated with care. She said that the elder thanked the stranger who had given his horse so that a life could be carried home. She said that such a deed was not measured by weight or coin, but by an older scale that belonged to the people and to the earth that raised them. She said that a law older than Samuel's country had been woken when he sent his horse forward without debt or demand, and that law had a name the wind itself would not mock. Samuel listened, stiff as fence post and twice as dry. He found his voice and managed to say that he had done what anyone should do. Ayanna's mouth curved in the hint of a sad smile as she translated. The elder replied at length, and though Samuel could not understand the words, he felt in their cadence the shape of disagreement. Ayanna looked at Samuel a long moment before speaking for her grandfather again. Most men do not give away the only animal that stands between them and thirst, she said softly. Most men do not carry a stranger toward danger when safety lies in the opposite direction. The elder says that when a horse is given for a life, the giver binds himself to that life and to those it belongs to. It is called the binding of the horse gift. It cannot be undone by saying it was nothing. Samuel swallowed and felt the bridle's weight in his hands. He had meant no bargain. He had meant no oath. Yet here under a sky that kept its own counsel, meaning did not bow to his intentions. The elder spoke again, then lifted his staff and pointed at the wide empty basin beyond the ridge, where the land fell away to a hidden hollow. Ayanna listened and translated. Until the sun touches the far rock, you are guest. When the sun leaves the ridge and the first evening star shows, the choosing will begin. The choosing is not to hurt you, Samuel Carter. The choosing is to speak the truth aloud so that all can hear, even the parts that men hide from themselves. If your truth is steady, you will be tied to us as brother. If it is not, you will leave with your horse and no harm will follow you. But the path between our people and your name will be shut. Guest. The word tasted foreign and warm at once. Samuel let out a breath he had not known he was holding. The elder nodded, then made a small gesture. The gray-streaked rider dismounted, stepped close, and offered Samuel the white feather he had carried. He held it in both hands. The angle of his wrist said this was not a thing to be snatched. Samuel hesitated. Taking it would be like signing a ledger he could not read. Refusing it would be a slap across an offered palm. He thought of his father, who could cuss a stream white, but would still take off his hat in a church. He thought of his sister, whose breath had rattled like a pebble in a tin cup the day he could not bring help fast enough. He reached out and accepted the feather. Something in the air eased the way the sky lightens when a storm chooses to walk around a farm instead of through it. The elder inclined his head and motioned. The procession turned. Iana came close to Samuel and touched his forearm with gentle fingers that left a crescent of warmth. "Come," she said. "The village waits." They walked a path that seemed to open as they moved a pale track that wound between juniper and rock as if the land had been taught to make a road only when a purpose deserved it. The basin was a bowl of stone, its floor sown with dwellings that breathed smoke and stew scents. Everything was arranged with a geometry that required neither ruler nor chalk. Children watched him openly, not with fear, but with a seriousness that felt heavier than suspicion. Women nodded, eyes measuring, and men held themselves like arrow shafts, straight and reserved. Ayanna guided him to a broad circle of stones, where men were laying larger rocks in a ring, and women were weaving lengths of fiber rope. The work was unhurried, exact. No voice was raised, no tool clattered carelessly. Samuel understood then that the choosing was not a spectacle. It was a kind of prayer where the earth itself was the listener. She brought him to a dwelling set a little apart, larger than the rest, and painted with lines that curved and crossed, in patterns his eyes could not track without losing place. Inside, the light was cool and sifted, and there was a smell of sage that seemed to comb the dust out of his lungs. The elder sat on a woven mat. Before him lay objects placed as if each had been told where to rest. Samuel saw a knife with a handle carved like a river, bend a small clay bowl of dark paint, a bundle of herbs bound with sinew, and the bridle of his horse lying in the center. Ayanna stood to one side. Her face was unreadable now, like a pond that does not reveal the stones beneath. The elder spoke in a tone that did not ask for quiet, but brought it anyway. She translated with pauses to catch every turn of meaning. "He says the choosing has 3 doors. You must pass through each with your hands tied so that only your words and your breath can walk with you. First is the door of heart, where elders ask why you did what you did and turn your answer to the light from every angle. Second is the door of loss, where you must give up something you believe you cannot spare and do it without bitterness. Third is the door of belonging, where you must place the good of people before the beating of your own blood." Samuel's mouth felt dusty as a boot heel. He wanted water, yes, but more than that, he wanted certainty, which the prairie never poured for any man. He asked what would be taken in the second door. Ayanna listened to the elder and said that what is offered would be seen and weighed. If it was nothing dressed up as something, the door would not open. If it was everything, the elders would know. The elder lifted the knife so that it caught a slant of light. He did not turn the blade toward Samuel. He turned it toward himself, touched the flat to his own brow, and then placed it back upon the mat. He dipped a finger into the clay bowl, drew a symbol on his forehead, and pushed the bowl across the mat until it rested within Samuel's reach. The motion was slow, almost tender. Samuel stared at the paint. He thought of the ridge and the 70 riders and the white feather that now felt like a small bird breathing in his palm. He thought of the stone circle where people still worked hands, busy with rope that might bind him at twilight. He thought of rust in his own name, and the way the elder had said guest-like, it was a word with no edges. Ayanna's voice softened. "If you accept, you place the sign upon yourself. You speak with your skin before you speak with your mouth. You tell the people you are ready to be looked at all the way to the bone." Samuel reached and found the paint cool as creek shade. He touched it to his forehead. It dragged a line that felt both like a claim and like surrender. The elder let out a breath, not triumph, not relief, something older than either. He rose, touched Samuel's shoulder once as a father might, who is about to let go of the back of a bicycle, and then motioned him toward the doorway. Outside, the sun had walked a good distance toward the far rock. Shadows lengthened across the basin, like black sails lowering. The ring of stones stood finished. The ropes were coiled in a neat basket at the edge of the circle. The 70 riders had taken places around the rim of the basin, where they became once more silhouettes cut from dusk. Children had stopped playing and sat with their chins in their hands. The village looked not at Samuel, but toward the place where the sky would later set a single star on the lip of the ridge. Ayanna stood beside him, her limp more pronounced in the waning light. "There is still time to drink," she said, and handed him a gourd cup that smelled faintly of smoke and mint. He drank. The coolness spread through him like rain moving across a dry field. He handed the cup back and said thank you. She nodded as if he had said the right thing, and also as if it hardly mattered because soon only the shape of his truth would speak for him. "When the sun touches the far rock," she said, "the first door opens. You will be asked and you will answer, and you will find that silence is a kind of answer too. Her eyes lifted to the ridge, then returned to his face. Do not be afraid of what you discover when your own words turn and look back at you. That is the only part that ever saves a man. Samuel breathed, felt the white feather warming in his palm, and waited as the light thinned to a finer and finer thread. The prairie has a way of measuring a man without scales or numbers. In that hour before the choosing, Samuel felt the measure being taken, and for the first time he did not try to lean one way or the other to change it. He simply stood and let the day finish its work. The sky turned the color of hammered copper as the sun neared the jagged lip of the horizon. Fires were lit around the stone circle, their smoke rising in narrow ribbons that caught the last light. The ropes woven that afternoon now rested across the arms of young warriors coiled neatly but waiting. Samuel was guided to the center of the circle. His wrists were bound behind his back with the same fiber tight enough to remind him that choice was narrowing, but not cruelly so. The crowd gathered in silence, 70 riders forming an outer ring, families within elders seated on low stools at the circle's edge. Ayanna stood close enough that her shadow fell across his boots. She met his eyes only once, then looked toward her grandfather, who began to speak. The elder's voice rose and fell like a slow chant, heavy with authority that required no weapons. Ayanna translated in a low tone, meant only for Samuel. This is the first door, she said, the door of heart. They will ask you questions that may wound more sharply than knives. You cannot shield yourself with hands or horse or steel. You must answer, and your answers will show the shape of your soul. The first elder to speak was a woman with skin like weathered bark and eyes bright as river stones. She asked why Samuel had entered Apache land, knowing it was dangerous. He told her the truth that drought had driven him farther than planned, searching for grazing. She nodded, though her lips remained pressed. The second elder, a man scarred across one cheek, asked if Samuel had expected reward when he lifted Ayanna onto his horse. Samuel answered no. He had expected nothing but danger. The man leaned back, eyes narrowing, as if he was weighing that answer against a scale invisible to anyone else. Another elder leaned forward. Do you believe yourself a good man? The question came sharp as an arrowhead. Samuel hesitated. His throat felt dry again, though water still lingered in his stomach from the gourd Ayanna had offered. I don't know if I'm good, he said slowly. I only know leaving someone to die when I could help would have been wrong. His voice shook, but he did not look away. A murmur passed through the watchers. The woman elder asked again, sharper this time, if helping was right. Why did you not bring Ayanna toward your own people, where her wound might be treated by your doctors? Why leave her with us when you could have been honored among whites as a savior? The question stung. Samuel felt sweat on his brow, though evening had cooled. Because she belonged with her own, he said. To tear her from them, even to save her, would have been another cruelty. She needed her people, not strangers who would look at her as less than human. The elders conferred, voices low and urgent. One of them, older than the rest, with hair as white as ash, looked directly into Samuel's face. He spoke a short phrase. Ayanna translated softly, her voice trembling. He asked if your kindness was truly for Ayanna, or if it was punishment for yourself. Did you give your horse because you still carry guilt for those you failed before? Samuel's chest clenched. Memory surged, unbidden, his sister pale, and fading because he had not found a doctor in time. The graves of his parents, the ranch gone to dust. He closed his eyes. Maybe both, he whispered. I could not save them, but I could save her. The elders sat very still. Then Ayanna's grandfather rose. He spoke at length, his words carrying across the circle. Ayanna's voice followed, translating. The elders say your heart is not clean of sorrow, but it is not poisoned by deceit. They believe your gift was true. You have passed the first door. The ropes at Samuel's wrists remained. The fires still burned. Relief pricked him like needles, but quickly faded as the elder continued. Now comes the second door, the door of loss. It is heavier than the first. He gestured, and two young men carried a wooden box into the circle, setting it before Samuel with care. When the lid was lifted, Samuel saw 5 arrows, each shaft painted with a band of color: red, black, white, yellow, blue. Beside each arrow lay a scrap of leather marked with symbols. The elder spoke. Ayanna translated. These arrows are 5 trials. 5 among our people have offered themselves to risk death in your place. You must choose which of them will walk the trial for you. Samuel stared at the arrows, then at the faces of 5 volunteers stepping forward. A boy barely older than 16, a mother with kind eyes, a scarred warrior, a girl who looked too much like his sister had, a man his own age with children clinging to his wife at the edge of the crowd. Ayana's voice shook as she explained each arrow. Red to cross the rapids at night, black to enter the cave of the mountain cat, white to climb the cliff no man has climbed, yellow to walk into the land of enemies and return alive, blue to suffer the bite of a rattlesnake and survive with herbs alone. Samuel's stomach lurched. He was to choose who among them would risk life for his acceptance. He shook his head. That's no sacrifice, he muttered. That's cruelty. Ayana's eyes softened. That is the test, to see if you will let others pay the price. The elder's voice rose again, announcing that Samuel must select an arrow. The people watched silent but intent. The 5 volunteers stood steady, neither pleading nor resisting. They had offered. The circle of stone seemed to close tighter. Samuel's hands trembled against the rope. His mind raced. He thought of his sister's words years ago, spoken with the last of her strength. Courage is not about being unafraid. It is doing what is right, even when fear owns you. He looked at the arrows, then at the faces waiting, then back to the elders. I will not choose, he said. If a life must be risked, let it be mine. I will face them all, every trial, tonight. The words rang out across the circle, carried on the wind. The crowd gasped. The elders froze. Even Ayana's breath caught. The elder's staff lowered slowly as if weighed down by new gravity. The 70 warriors on the ridge shifted at once, raising their feathers high. A sound rose among them, not a war cry, but a chant deep and unbroken, like the earth answering back. Ayana's grandfather spoke, voice trembling with a rare emotion. Ayana's eyes filled as she translated. No one has ever offered this. No one has chosen certain death rather than ask another to suffer. By this choice, you have already given the sacrifice. The trials are ended. The circle erupted in murmur, astonishment, and awe woven together. One by one, the warriors descended from the ridge. They dismounted and approached Samuel, each kneeling and laying a white feather at his feet. Gifts followed: knives, blankets, jewelry, and finally his horse Rust, adorned with new Apache tack painted with symbols of honor. Samuel swayed, overwhelmed. He had not fought, not bled, yet he had laid down his life in intent, and that had been enough. The elder placed both hands on his shoulders. You came as stranger, Ayana translated. You leave as brother. The firelight danced on the feathers on the horse, returned on the faces of a people who had accepted him. And Samuel Carter, once only a man wandering the prairie alone, felt something new, the weight and warmth of belonging. Night had settled gently over the basin, the stars pressing close as if they too wished to witness what had unfolded. Samuel stood unbound now, the ropes cut away by a young warrior whose knife gleamed like a sliver of moonlight. The circle of stones still glowed with the warmth of fire, and at its center lay the mound of feathers and gifts that had been placed before him. He could scarcely believe they were meant for him, a drifter who had arrived with nothing but dust on his boots and thirst in his throat. Russ nickered softly nearby, outfitted in tack, decorated with careful hands. The symbols painted there were not for show. Ayana explained in a hushed voice that each line and swirl was a mark of protection, a pledge that the horse now carried not only its rider, but the honor of the tribe. Samuel reached out, stroked Rust's muzzle, and felt a lump rise in his throat. He had given the animal away, expecting never to see him again, and now he returned, transformed, as if part of something larger. The elder called for silence, though none had spoken. His presence alone hushed the crowd. He lifted his staff and declared words that Ayana translated with a voice trembling between exhaustion and pride. Tonight the horse gift is fulfilled. The man called Samuel Carter has bound himself through courage, not by accident, but by choice. He is brother, and our blood is his blood. The people responded with a sound that was not applause, but a low, resonant chant. It rose and fell in waves, echoing off the rock walls, until it seemed the earth itself was chanting. Samuel felt his knees weaken. He had endured hunger storms and loneliness across the frontier, but nothing had ever made him tremble like this recognition. After the chant, the gathering shifted from solemnity to celebration. Fires were stoked higher, and women carried baskets of roasted corn beans and bread made from ground seeds. Children ran between the fires, laughter finally breaking the tension that had gripped the village all day. Warriors stood in clusters, speaking in voices that rumbled like distant thunder. But many of them cast glances towards Samuel, not hostile, not even curious, but respectful in a way that made him uncomfortable. Respect was something he had not felt from anyone in years. Aina guided him to sit near her family's fire. She moved stiffly, her wound not yet healed, but her steps carried determination. She offered him food, and he accepted with gratitude, the taste of roasted corn sweeter than anything he remembered. He tried to speak his thanks in simple words, but Ayana's smile told him that the people understood gratitude without needing translation. When the meal had quieted, Ayana's grandfather approached and sat across from Samuel. The old man's eyes reflected the firelight, deep and unblinking. He spoke at length, and Ayana translated with patience. My grandfather says that what you did has changed the path of your life. He says no man gives a horse without binding himself to the people of that life. He warns that being brother is not an honor alone. It is a duty. Samuel nodded slowly. Duty he understood. He had failed his own blood once, but perhaps here was a chance to carry weight that mattered. He said quietly, I don't know your laws, but I will not turn my back if you call on me. Ayana's grandfather studied him, then gave a single nod, sharp and decisive. That was enough. Later, as the fires burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Samuel walked a little apart from the others. He needed air that was not thick with ceremony space to think. The white feathers still lay piled at the circle, dozens of them glowing pale in the starlight. He bent and picked one up, held it between thumb and forefinger. Light as breath, yet it carried the weight of 70 promises. He wondered if he could ever be equal to them. Ayana approached quietly, her steps soft on the packed earth. You doubt, she said. He almost laughed. I am one man. What if I fail? She tilted her head, her dark eyes reflecting the fire's last glow. You already failed in the past, and still you chose to act again. That is why they believe you, not because you are perfect, but because you did not let failure close your heart. Her words pierced him more deeply than any question the elders had asked. He thought again of his sister, of how he had carried the guilt like a stone in his chest. Maybe tonight that stone had shifted, not vanished, but changed into something he could carry with purpose. The village grew quieter as families drifted into their dwellings. The warriors remained at the rim, keeping watch, with feathers tied to their bridles. Samuel felt sleep tugging at his eyes, but also an unfamiliar sense of safety. He was a stranger, yet tonight he lay within a circle of guardians. He stretched on a woven mat offered by Ayana's kin. Russ tethered nearby and let the sound of soft chanting fade into the rustle of the night wind. As he closed his eyes, Samuel realized that the prairie no longer felt empty. It was filled with voices, bonds, and promises, woven around him like threads of an unseen net. Tomorrow would bring questions, duties, perhaps even burdens he could not yet imagine. But for the first time in years, he did not fear the dawn. He welcomed it. The first light of dawn crept gently into the basin, brushing the tops of the dwellings with gold. Samuel woke to the smell of smoke still lingering in the air, and the muffled sound of voices stirring to life. For a moment he forgot where he was, his body expecting the lonely silence of empty prairie. But then he saw Russ tethered nearby with the Apache tack still gleaming in the morning light, and memory returned like a tide. He was no longer a wanderer with nothing but a horse. He was a man tied to 70 families by a gift he had given in a moment of instinct. Children ran past, their laughter bright against the cool air. Women tended to the fires, setting pots to boil with roots and grain. Warriors were already mounted at the basin's rim, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Samuel sat up slowly, rubbing stiffness from his shoulders. A boy approached shyly, carrying a bowl of steaming broth. He offered it with two hands, his gaze steady but respectful. Samuel accepted and nodded his thanks, lifting the bowl to his lips. The taste was earthy and strong, and warmth spread through him as he drank. Ayana limped toward him, her steps more stable than the night before. She wore fresh wrappings around her leg, and though the wound slowed her, her presence carried quiet strength. She sat beside him without ceremony, folding her hands in her lap. You slept, she said softly. He gave a short laugh. I don't remember the last time I slept without one eye open. She studied him for a moment before speaking again. Last night changed many things, not just for you. The horse gift law is not spoken often. It is ancient. Many of our young thought it belonged only to stories. You reminded them that the old ways still live. Samuel swallowed the last of the broth, feeling the weight of her words settle. I didn't know, he admitted. I only did what seemed right. Ayana tilted her head. That is the point. The ones who try to earn honor for themselves never find it. The ones who give without knowing the cost awaken something greater. Before Samuel could reply, her grandfather appeared. The elder leaned on his staff, his face solemn yet calm. He spoke at length, and Ayana translated. You are our brother now. That means you carry duty as well as honor. Our people will protect you, but in return you must also stand with us when the time comes. Samuel nodded slowly. I understand. Tell me what is needed. The elder's eyes softened, but he did not speak again. Instead, he gestured for Samuel to rise and follow. They walked together through the village, passing women grinding corn children, fetching watermen sharpening tools. The people met Samuel's gaze openly, now their respect quiet but unmistakable. Some even touched their fingers to their hearts in greeting. At the far end of the basin lay a place Samuel had not seen the night before. A wide, flat rock carved with symbols. Around it, younger warriors trained their bodies, moving with the rhythm of practice, wooden spears, striking against each other in controlled patterns. The elder pointed toward them and spoke. Ayana's voice carried the meaning. He says you must learn not only our laws but our ways. A brother who does not understand the path of his people is a brother in name only. Samuel felt his chest tighten. He was no warrior, no trained fighter. He was a ranch hand who had survived by grit and stubbornness. Yet he saw no mockery in the faces of the warriors, only expectation. One of the younger men stepped forward, offering Samuel a wooden staff. It was smooth and solid, its weight surprising in his hands. The warrior demonstrated a basic stance, feet braced, staff held firm. Samuel mimicked the motion clumsily. The warrior corrected him with a nod, patient and steady. There was no ridicule, only instruction. Hours passed as Samuel repeated movements, his arms burning with effort, his legs trembling from stances held too long. Sweat ran down his back, but he did not quit. He had failed too many before to allow himself failure now. The warriors watched, offering corrections, but also small gestures of approval when he found the rhythm. When at last the elder raised his staff, the training ended. Samuel leaned on the wooden weapon, panting. His hands blistered, but his spirit felt strangely lighter. For the first time in years, he was not drifting without purpose. He was learning, growing into a role he had not chosen, but had accepted. As the sun climbed higher, the elder led him back toward the circle of stones. There the white feathers still lay in a pile. He motioned for Samuel to kneel. Ayana's voice softened as she translated. Each feather is a promise from a family. Today you must return your promise to them. You must speak aloud that their trust will not be wasted. Samuel's throat tightened. Words had always been hard for him. He was a man of deeds, not speeches. Yet he looked at the mound of feathers and the people gathered once more waiting. Slowly he lifted one feather, held it high, and spoke with a voice rough but steady. I will not abandon what I gave. Your people are my people. Your burdens are my burdens. Ayana repeated his words in Apache. The crowd murmured approval, the sound like wind moving through tall grass. Samuel replaced the feather gently on the pile, then stood. He had given his promise, and it bound him as surely as the ropes had bound his wrists the night before. That night, as the fires burned once more, Samuel sat with Ayana beside him. She told him stories of her people, tales of old battles, of migrations, of ceremonies that tied them to land and sky. He listened, letting the cadence of her words soak into him, like rain into thirsty soil. When the stars rose again, Samuel lay on his mat, staring upward. He knew the path ahead would not be simple. To carry the honor of 70 families was to carry 70 expectations. Yet for the first time in his wandering life, he felt not burden, but belonging. And in that belonging, he found the faint beginnings of peace. 3 days passed in the Apache village, and with each dawn, Samuel felt the weight of belonging settle deeper upon his shoulders. The rhythms of daily life began to fold around him, the calls of children at play, the steady hum of women grinding corn, the chants of warriors sharpening spears and telling old stories. Samuel rose with the sun, trained with the younger men, tended to small tasks with his rough but willing hands, and listened each evening to Ayana as she translated the wisdom of her grandfather. Yet belonging was never given without trial. On the fourth morning, a rider returned from the northern ridge with urgency in his eyes. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his voice cut sharp as he spoke. The village gathered quickly, and Ayana explained to Samuel in hushed tones, scouts from a rival band had been sighted moving closer than in many seasons past. These were not allies nor neutral wanderers. They were men with blood feuds, men who had slain Apache the spring before. The elder listened with a face carved from stone. He spoke slowly, firmly, and Ayana translated. The presence of an enemy so near means they test us. They search for weakness. We must answer, not with haste, but with steadiness. He looked at Samuel, then eyes narrowing as though measuring the stranger's soul once more. A brother cannot stand aside when danger nears the fire. He must take his place. Samuel felt his heart tighten. He was no soldier, but he knew what it was to defend what mattered. He nodded. Tell me where I am needed. The decision was swift. A small group of warriors, including Samuel, would ride to the northern ridge and watch for signs of the rival band. They would not provoke battle, but they would show strength. The sight of numbers might be enough to turn intruders aside. Samuel saddled Russ, the familiar feel of the reins grounding him. Yet when his hands touched the decorated tack, he remembered the promise bound within it. 70 families had placed their trust upon this horse, upon him. He was no longer riding only for himself. The warriors rode in silence, the land stretching wide and unforgiving around them. The air was heavy with the scent of juniper and dust. When they reached the ridge, Samuel's breath caught. Across the canyon, faint but unmistakable figures moved between the rock, scouts from the rival band, watching just as they were watched. The distance between them was filled not with arrows, but with tension, sharp as steel. One of the younger warriors beside Samuel gripped his spear tightly, anger burning in his eyes. Samuel reached out, laying a hand on the man's arm. Not yet, he said quietly. He did not know if his words would be understood, but tone carried meaning. The young warrior's gaze softened slightly, though the spear remained ready. Hours passed with the two groups staring across the canyon. The sun climbed, shadows shifted. The rival scouts raised their weapons, once a gesture, half challenge, half warning. Samuel felt his pulse race, but he did not lift his rifle. He stood steady beside the others, Russ breathing calm beneath him. He remembered the elder's words, steadiness, not haste. At last, as the sun dipped toward afternoon, the rival band retreated, vanishing into the rocks like shadows dissolving into stone. A long breath escaped from the Apache riders. They had been tested and had not broken. When they returned to the village, the people gathered to hear. Samuel allowed Ayana to speak for him, explaining how he had counseled patience to the young warrior. The elder listened, then nodded once. You remembered that courage is not always to strike, but sometimes to hold. That is a lesson even our own forget. That evening, as the fires lit again, Samuel sat quietly, the white feather he still carried resting in his palm. He thought of how quickly fear could turn to violence, how easily men could be swept into blood. He wondered how many times he himself had chosen the quick path, the angry path in years past. Tonight he had chosen stillness, and it had been enough. Ayana sat beside him, her legs still bound, but her spirit fierce. You are learning, she said. He gave a wry smile. I'm stumbling through, but yes, maybe learning. She looked at him intently. My grandfather says each brother must show his worth in more than one way. You gave a horse. You gave words. Today you gave patience. But one day soon you may have to give your body to protect this village. Are you ready for that? Samuel stared into the fire. Sparks rose and vanished into the dark. At last he said, if it comes to that, I won't run. I've run enough in my life. The fire crackled as if answering. Around them the people sang low songs that spoke of endurance and belonging. Samuel listened, feeling the truth of Ayana's words. His trials were not ended. They had only begun. As the night deepened, Samuel looked once more at the feather. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a path, and he knew he had already taken the first steps. The warning came with the first storm clouds of summer. Dark masses rolled across the horizon, thunder muttering like an old warrior clearing his throat. Samuel had risen early, helping repair a corral that the wind had battered during the night, when he saw riders return at a gallop. Their faces told the tale before words reached his ears. The rival band had not retreated far. They had gathered strength, and now they approached in greater numbers. The village stilled as the news spread. Women drew children close, warriors checked weapons, elders conferred in urgent tones. Ayana found Samuel near the fire pit. Her eyes were steady, though her hands trembled slightly. They come for blood this time, she said. My grandfather says there will be no avoiding battle. Samuel felt his chest tighten. He had not sought this fight yet. He knew he could not stand aside. 70 families had given him feathers, had called him brother. A brother did not watch from the edge when the storm came. He stepped into it. The warriors gathered at the ridge before dusk. Samuel rode Rust at their side, the decorated tack gleaming with symbols of protection. He carried no rifle, only a spear one of the younger men had placed in his hand days before, and the wooden staff he had trained with. His palms sweated, but his gaze held steady. Across the canyon, the rival band appeared, more than 24 riders, their cries echoing like hawks. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Then the enemy surged forward, a wave of horses and steel. The Apache warriors answered with a cry that shook the stones. Samuel's body moved before thought, Rust plunging into the fray. The clash was chaos, dust rising, hooves pounding, steel clanging. Samuel fought clumsily, at first blocking more than striking, but instinct kept him alive. He saw a young warrior fall, an enemy bearing down on him. Without thinking, Samuel spurred Rust forward, placing himself between them. The rival's blade slashed across his shoulder, burning fire into flesh. He swung the staff with desperate strength, knocking the man from his saddle. Pain lanced through him, but he stayed upright. Around him, the Apache held firm, their formation tight, their cries rising. The storm broke with fury, but it did not sweep them away. Slowly, the rival band faltered momentum, bleeding out as their fallen littered the ground. At last, seeing no victory, they retreated, vanishing into the gathering dusk. Samuel swayed in his saddle, blood seeping down his arm. The world blurred, but he remained mounted until the last enemy disappeared. Only then did he allow himself to slump, sliding down, as strong hands caught him. Ayanna was suddenly there, her voice urgent, her eyes fierce with fear. "You fool," she whispered, pressing cloth against his wound. "You could have been killed." He managed a weak smile. "Better me than him," he murmured, nodding toward the young warrior he had shielded. Back in the basin, fires blazed to welcome the returning riders. The people gathered in awe, their voices rising in chants of triumph and mourning for the few they had lost. Samuel sat near the elder's dwelling, his wound bandaged, his body aching, but his spirit strangely at peace. Ayanna's grandfather approached slowly, his staff tapping the earth with each step. He looked down at Samuel, his expression unreadable. Then, in deliberate motion, he removed a single white feather from his own headdress, the highest symbol of his station, and placed it gently in Samuel's lap. Ayanna translated with tears in her eyes. "He says the horse gift is fulfilled. He says the choosing is ended. You are not only brother, you are warrior among us." The crowd lifted their voices, a chant that rolled like thunder through the basin. Children danced, women sang, warriors raised spears to the sky. Samuel sat still, the feather resting in his hands, heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. That night the village feasted. Songs were sung of the battle, but Samuel's part was told with reverence, not pride. He had not slain the most nor fought with the greatest skill, but he had placed his body between death and another, giving himself without hesitation. That was the heart of their law, the essence of the horse gift. When the fires burned low, Samuel walked a little apart, Rust following quietly. He looked at the stars wheeling overhead and felt a sense of belonging that went deeper than words. He was no longer a wanderer haunted by failure. He was a man bound by feathers, by promises, by blood spilled and shared. Ayanna joined him, her limp slowing her steps, but not her spirit. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You have found your place." Samuel nodded, maybe for the first time. The wind moved gently across the basin, carrying the faint echo of chants and laughter. Samuel knew the frontier would always hold danger, storms, and enemies. But now he faced them, not as one man alone. He faced them as brother, as warrior, as part of a people who had seen his heart and chosen to call it their own. And for the first time since his sister's death, Samuel felt the weight of his life, not as a burden, but as an honor.